You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Podcast Network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Welcome to We Are Libertarians Daily. I'm Sarah Brady Wagner, and I'm here today with Rhinehold.
Hello.
Today we're going to discuss the Laquan McDonald shooting. Recently, the officer involved in this shooting was found guilty of murder and in the second degree and guilty of 16 individual counts of aggravated battery, but found not guilty of official misconduct. We wanted to go through what this case is about. I'm sure you'll be hearing more about it from people in your daily life, or at least in your social media realms, and we want to make sure that everybody has a full understanding of the issue. So I'm just going to jump right into discussing the timeline then. In October of 2014, Officer Van Dyke shot 17-year-old Laquan McDonald 16 times in Chicago. What was notable about this shooting was that the policy at the time was not to release any information on the issue since it was an ongoing investigation. So we didn't have any videos that immediately came out like we do in more recent cases. The video that was critical to this case actually did not come out until a year later, and that was only after a court order to release the video, which then showed the officer shooting Laquan McDonald not once, but 16 different times. What was also kind of interesting about this case was that in April of 2015, the city council in Chicago voted unanimously in favor of paying a $5 million settlement to the McDonald family. And in this case, there was not a lawsuit that was filed. This was done without the family having in any way officially asked to be compensated. It's not an unprecedented situation, but it is unique in kind of what it says about the city accepting responsibility for the situation. But at this point, the officer in question was still not charged. The Tribune, during December of 2014, all the way up through December of 2015, the Chicago Tribune came across emails that were released from the City Hall administration at the time that showed how the government was trying to handle the aftermath of the shooting and scrambling to kind of cover it up and make it as much of a minimized issue as they could. But in May of 2015, journalist Brandon Smith filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Chicago Police Department asking for the videos from the night that Van Dyke shot and killed McDonald. After 3 extensions, the Chicago Police Department denied the request for the video, and they cited an ongoing investigation into the shooting, which they refused to provide any more details for. In August of 2015, Smith then filed charges. He filed against the Chicago Police Department to release the videos, and in November, a Cook County judge issued a ruling ordering the city to release the police dash cam video, which they then did. And conveniently, as soon as they released the dash cam video, he was charged, the officer in question, Van Dyke, was charged immediately with first-degree murder.
But was he charged before or after the riots that started because of the release of the dash cam video?
I think he was charged at about the same time. It was the dash cam video came out. It came out on the 24th, and the same
Right.
day he was charged.
Right. Okay, so they did it just as they released it. I'm kind of curious about that, why they didn't charge him beforehand, or if just nobody in the prosecutor's office even saw the video, or it had been hidden that well, even internally.
Well, it looks like there were actually additional videos that still hadn't been released. So there were more videos released afterwards in November, but the protests and the riots themselves lasted from November to March. So long after they had charged the officer. The protests lasted from November of 2015 until March of 2016 and involved a series of protests, many lasting several hours, specifically including the chant 16 shots, which was, and they called for the mayor to resign and for the superintendent of police to be fired, actually. And in December of 2015, the superintendent actually was fired. They issued the statement issued at the time was, "We have to recognize that if we don't like the way the system works, change the system right. I described to you all the things that people wanted from police oversight and outside investigatory agencies exist in Chicago. And at the end of the day, they didn't like the results. And somebody had to take the fall for it, and somebody had to take the hit." That was the statement from the superintendent about his being fired. So not really taking much responsibility for it, but saying that somebody had to be the sacrificial lamb. And that's kind of a pattern that we see throughout this case, is a real sense of indignity, not necessarily from the rank and file officers in the Chicago Police Department, but from the higher up that are involved specifically in the cover up in this case. There's not a whole lot of taking responsibility even now after we have, the officers convicted of second-degree murder.
Yeah, and as I read it, there's a lot more cover up that was done behind the scenes. I don't know if you want to get to that in the timeline layout, but the video that was captured from the Burger King, for instance, was somehow that there was an 86-minute gap that was deleted from the surveillance footage, right? It really looks like there was a huge cover up here. We had several officers lying about their, what was said, what happened. Their testimony was proven to be not accurate with what the video ends up showing.
Yeah, the officer's testimony really seemed to focus a lot on, as officer involved shootings often do, that the officer had feared for his life, and specifically there was a lot of testimony about the look in his eyes. I know one of the issues that was brought in was that he was on PCP, I think was what they said he was on at the time, but that once you got the video came out, there wasn't a whole lot to corroborate the way that the officer's story went, but that they stuck with that story. To me, that's what floored me so much about this, and kind of feeds into that worry about a cover up is, when you've got that many people involved in a lie, you stick to the lie, even when it starts falling apart.
Right. And it's a pattern we see over, a lot of these different shootings like this. They protect each other, and they will do what they can to try to, deflect any attention from the actual event and from the officer involved.
Well, that's been called a culture of silence among police officers, and I've read some into the difference between rank and file police officers as opposed to your sergeants and your chief of police and your commissioners, and the kind of cultural differences within that policing community. And I guess who do you think holds more responsibility for that? Is it the individual officers themselves, or is it more on, like the commissioner who got fired?
Well, what I would say is that in individual cases, it's really on the officers themselves. They should be taking it upon themselves to be good stewards of their role of defending and protecting the people, not defending themselves, as it were. So they should be willing to come forward and say this. So on an individual basis, it's the officers. But when you start to see a pattern of that behavior in a police department, then you really have to focus on those people who are leading the police department, whether or not they're making sure that their officers are going out with the right mindset and wanting to make sure that proper justice is being done. Right. So I think that's what you really have to do, is start looking at the patterns that are happening within a specific force or not.
So one of the other ways to kind of handle that, more favored by our friends on the left, is what happened then in December of 2015, which would be the U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch announced that the Justice Department was beginning an investigation into the Chicago Police Department. And it's turned out that particular investigation is not what resulted in these charges. And as far as its impact on this case, it didn't play as strongly into it. But what do you think as far as the usefulness or even just efficacy of having the federal government step in to kind of mediate these issues where a corruption is just so endemic within a department?
Well, you really have to have some sort of external independent examination of that. And it's typically been the federal government over the course of the country, that we've been in existence, going and finding that's corruption in the different locations, police forces, state, local, that sort of thing. So I think that you need a watchdog. You need a watchdog that has the power of forcing testimony, applying fines, that sort of thing. So it's got to be something that's within the law enforcement realm, government, that sort of thing. So I think the federal makes the most sense to do that with. Unfortunately, I see sometimes this becoming used as a political tool, which is always the problem when you start getting politics involved and government involved in these types of things. But don't really know if there's a better option on how to police the police.
That's fair. It's a difficult situation because you have to have somebody who can step in as, as a rule enforcer or the enforcer of the rule of law.
Right. I mean, we have these boards now, the civilian boards who will make recommendations. But if nobody's taking that recommendation on and willing to actually apply those recommendations onto the police, then there's no force behind any of it. So at some point, you need some way to use that power to, bring people to justice, as it were.
Well, it's funny that you suggest that, because a week after that investigation was announced, Mayor Emanuel in Chicago announced the creation of the Task Force on Police Accountability, which specifically was created to study the processes, oversight, and training at the Chicago Police Department and, exactly what you said, make recommendations.
Right, and just the recommendations, especially when it's the police force doing itself, right? Trying to police itself, internal affairs, that sort of thing. You're going to always run into a lot of resistance there, and it's going to be very hard to do any kind of to get any kind of justice for things that are so egregious that this event, right? So again, that's where I think some sort of independent outside body really needs to be involved on some of these cases.
So on December 16th, 2015, Van Dyke was indicted on 6 counts of first-degree murder and on 1 count of official misconduct. The case started playing out. There were, kind of interesting things that happened on the sidelines to give you an idea of just the culture around this whole case. There were 2 officers who, one was a detective and one was an officer, who both had filed reports about this shooting, and they were found to be dramatically at odds with the dash cam video that was released. And so in January, they were put on desk duty. And in March, Van Dyke, who was suspended without pay as he was indicted on murder charges, was actually hired as a janitor by the city's police union. So, even within this realm of ensuring accountability, there's still, that kind of that fraternal support. I mean, it's still everybody making sure to support each other. And I don't know, but that always kind of gives me conflicted feelings, because shouldn't a good officer kind of eschew the bad ones? And isn't that how you know that they're good?
Right, but at what point do they consider that officer bad? So how many police were involved in that shooting that would have spoken to somebody else and explained to them that what he had done was wrong? As far as a lot of the policemen knew, he had acted completely appropriately on the situation. Right. So once the video came out, then that changes. Right. But that's still, it's kind of hard I think, for a lot of policemen to find fault with their fellow officers, because they know that they may be in that same situation and they want somebody to give them the benefit of the doubt as well.
Well, I wonder if that's kind of where the conflict between the way that individual lay people perceive it and the way that officers may perceive it comes in, is kind of where you lay that assumption. I don't know. It's difficult to. I think it's more difficult for me to kind of assume that everybody had good intentions and everybody was kind of giving the benefit of the doubt when you make an active effort to cover things up.
Yeah, there were those who were covering it up very hard, and I think those are the people who weren't looking at it in the right way. They were trying to just close ranks and defend and get past it, as opposed to trying to make sure justice was served. Right.
It kind of draws into question the judgment of those officers, is to be able to look at the situation objectively. And I don't know, I just kind of worry how that would then bleed over into the way that they perceive, any individual interaction. So to go through the case timeline then, you have various people who were involved in the case who are fired or who resign, officers who are involved in the case who are found to be lying, have filed false police reports, things like that, or put on desk duty or paid leave. And again, the government officials and the police department officials who are involved in the case are unwilling to be forthcoming with evidence. There's an issue with the Attorney General saying that Chicago Police officers' emails discussing the Laquan McDonald shooting are not allowed to be kept secret because the department was trying to keep that as documents that didn't need to be considered in the case, and their official communications about the case. So what ended up happening then in the trial, only the one officer who shot Laquan McDonald was tried. And the jury declined to convict him of first-degree murder and instead decided to convict him of second-degree murder and to convict him of aggravated battery with a firearm, with an individual count for each shot. And the audio actually of the juror reading out those verdicts just one after another is, I mean, it's very impactful, at least to me. I mean, just each individual bullet is another reckless act. But what I found most interesting and haven't heard as much discussion about is the fact that he was found not guilty of official misconduct. And of everything in this case, that's the thing that actually surprised me and disheartens me the most, is this concept that an officer on duty in his official line of work can murder someone. And that's not just me perceiving it as murder, that's he has been convicted of murder in a court by a jury of his peers. And that's not official misconduct. What does that say about the way that we view officers in our society?
Well, I think part of the problem is looking at the actual statute for Illinois on official misconduct, is that there's a lot of words, a lot of verbiage in here specifically stating knowingly does, with intent, knowingly performs. And I think because they went with the second degree, that they were trying to say that he kind of made his mind up at the moment, but he didn't do it in an intentful way to improperly discharge his duties.
It wasn't premeditated.
I'm not sure I agree with that. Right. So, you know, that comes into play a lot with, mens rea is another thing that could be brought up into this. But it's really more a case, I think, of the way the statute is written and probably the way the instructions were given to the jury on this, as opposed to the jury just saying, well, we don't care about that charge. Right. Now, the question is do we accept that? Do we think that there should be a change to that? Is that the right way to look at it? Or does there have to be a conversation about whether or not that's something else that should be charged to the officer? I mean, he's going to be getting a lot of time for his actions. So I'm not sure if that's something that the jury just said, hey, let's not even quibble too much about this one. If we're not going to agree on it, let's just get this done and move on with the more serious charges.
Well, in sentencing him, each of those separate counts, it's the sentence is actually kind of, we're not quite sure how long he's sentenced to yet, because each count carries a mandatory sentence of 6 years, but also up to 30 years each. So we're not quite sure how that's going to play out.
Right. And could they claim that he's able to serve that concurrently? Right. Right. Or is it got to be one after the other? So there may be some discussions there on the sentencing. So do we know when the sentencing is going to happen, or?
Well, he still also has the opportunity to appeal.
Correct.
So I'm trying to look through here. I've got a couple of articles up to just make sure. There's no set date for any further sentencing right now, it looks like. And since he's being charged in state court, it really, I would probably be better if we had somebody who was more familiar with Illinois law. But sometimes those sentencing can be done without a formal hearing in some states. I'm not sure it's very many, but he does have a mandatory 6 years for each of those counts, and I don't believe that they can be done concurrently. I think they have to be done consecutively. But again, we still have an appeal, and this may get much. I mean, this is not over, I guess, is what I want to kind of sum that up in. Is
well, right, but with appeals, people think, oh, I can appeal and I'll get a better thing. You can't really appeal unless you have a reason. I mean, you have to be able to say, my defense failed me. The prosecution did this wrong. You know, there's usually got to be a reason to trigger an appeal like that, right? You can't always just claim one. So that probably is not going to happen too much in this case. I don't know if he's actually going to get an appeal or not from this based off of the evidence and everything that was put out.
His attorney has said that the reason that he filed so many pretrial motions was to preserve issues for an appeal in case he was convicted. So it at least seems like they were trying to plan for it ahead.
Yeah, every attorney does that, though, I think, in a criminal trial case like this, just so that they can try to lay a groundwork for an appeal in case they lose. That's really something that's always in the back of the minds of criminal defense attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
But the judicial system awarding that appeal then is going to be something that's going to have to be taken into account whether they do listen to it. Now, I'm more open to always having an appeal process because you never know what the initial trial could do if you find some exonerating evidence or you find out that the prosecution did something wrong, didn't hid information, that sort of thing. So it's always good, in my opinion, to have that appeal and go through that process. But pending appeal, he should probably be in jail serving his time. I don't think they're just going to let him out on bail pending appeal.
Yeah, my understanding is that he's going to at least be going to jail, but that they won't necessarily be transferring into prison immediately. The difference just being one is long-term and one is short-term. So do you think that this has, at least in a legal sense, do you think that this has the bigger impact that I've seen some of the news sources kind of try and make it out to be? I mean, I've seen more than one headline to the tune of the secret police silence is going on trial next. Do you think that this is the shadow of things to come, or is this kind of a one-time situation where this one officer was convicted, but this is not at all indicative of a greater pattern of criminal justice reform?
I don't know if I see it as a pattern of criminal justice reform or a positive in that regard. I think this is more a case of this was so egregious in the cover up. This was so egregious in the fact that the video shows him, turning away from the officer when the officer says he was pointing, going towards him. So, it's rare that you get that sort of evidence that, the police officer was so out of bounds, right? A lot of time it's more conflicting that, the person is doing something that could be taken, if you're in the right frame of mind, to be something that needed to be defensive. And there's a lot more defense on that case. So I don't know if it's going to make too much of an impact nationally on all the police forces. But I wish it would. I mean, I think that people need to start seeing this sort of thing. And there's a lot more cases than this of dash cams and body cams really starting to show what's really going on when the officer says, "I feared for my life." And then you watch the dash cam, you watch the body cam, and you start to say, no, that's you really were acting in the wrong here. So I think that more than anything is going to be what helps lead us to some sort of criminal justice reform, not specifically this one case.
Well, that's not as hopeful as some of the accounts that I've seen, but it definitely sounds more realistic.
Well, there was another video that was released not too long ago from a police action shooting that happened several years ago, where a police officer comes to an argument that was happening, kind of a domestic dispute in the street of a neighborhood, and it was snowing out. He gets out of his car, and the couple's dog, kind of starts to lunge at him a little bit, more in a, "Hey, who are you?" type of way, not really trying to attack him, it doesn't look like. But the police officer was actually you could tell he was very scared when he saw the dog. So he goes to shoot the dog, slips in the snow, and shoots the woman in the belly and kills her. All caught on footage. The whole body cam was released, so you can watch the whole event. And his main concern was, "I'm going to go to jail. I'm going to go to jail." Not, "I need to help her." And she lays there for minutes
Oh my God.
Before they try to do any kind of, saving of her. And she bleeds out before the ambulance can get there. So these types of things are going to start to, without body cams, without the dash cams, those sorts of things, this could have really they could have covered this up, and it was kind of covered up for years until this was released and people saw it, which caused a lot of outrage. So I think that's really where we're going to see the main benefit of this type of situation, right? So.
Well, I guess the last thing I want to say on the matter is that I actually see, so in my state, I'm in North Carolina. We actually, I think it was last year, it might have been 2016, but I think it was 2017, just passed a law making it completely illegal to release any body cam video to the public, regardless of the status of the case. And to me, that's just, this is a perfect situation where it shows like that's a law that's written to undermine trust in the police.
Right. And not only that I really think that that's going to be found to be not a proper law. That it's going to have to be struck down, maybe not on a federal Supreme Court level type thing, but a state level should look at that and say, no, this isn't good, because they've already tried to put in laws that you can't record police yourself, that sort of thing. And that's always been defended, that the civilians, the individuals, have that right in any interaction with the police, that they can record it. But there's still police officers who will say that you can't, and there's still ones who would try to prevent you from doing that or take your video from you, that sort of thing. So I think the courts will step in at some point and say that that's not, a valid law that they can enforce. But I would be interested to see how that plays out, because that could set some precedents that would counter the hopeful benefit of having that information, that those dash cams and body cams available to watch what the police are doing, because they are put into such a high level of trust with given the ability to use force on citizens. We need to make sure that they are doing that appropriately. And we haven't done a good job of that. Not in the last 20 or 30 years, and I don't know if we ever really have in the United States.
Well, that's as good of a thought to end on as any. So thank you for joining us today for We Are Libertarians Daily News. And we'll see you tomorrow.